Abraham's descendants, the sons of Israel, moved to Egypt because of a famine. Years later, fearing an uprising, the ruling Pharaoh of Egypt enslaved the Israelites, who had by then become a great nation. Despite the king's edict to kill all Israelite baby boys, God preserved the life of a baby named Moses through a series of remarkable events. As an adult, God chose Moses to lead the Israelites to freedom. When the Pharaoh refused to release the slaves, God sent 10 plagues upon Egypt that demonstrated his power and proved that he alone was the one true God. It was during the 10th plague, in the middle of the night, that the Israelites' freedom was gained. That night, the death angel was to kill every firstborn son in Egypt. There was only one way to escape judgment. If the blood of a male, year-old, perfect lamb was placed on their doorposts, then God promised, "When I see the blood, I will pass over you." The son would live because the lamb had died. After God delivered the Israelites from the hand of their oppressors, he miraculously brought them to safety through the Red Sea on dry ground. God then led the Israelites to the land of Canaan, the land he had promised to Abraham and his descendants. As the Israelites journeyed through the desert, God miraculously led and provided for them. God daily gave them manna, a bread from heaven. And he also provided water for them by causing a river to flow out of a rock. After 3 months of traveling, they finally arrived at Mount Sinai. This was the same place where God had first appeared to Moses a few months earlier. On that day, God had promised Moses that he would rescue his people out of Egypt and bring them to that very mountain. Now, God had fulfilled his promise, and the Israelites were about to meet with God. There at Mount Sinai, God was about to make a covenant with the Israelites. This covenant would be an agreement between God and humanity. And as God explained to the Israelites the terms of this covenant, God gave them his perfect laws. These laws would reveal more of God's character to his people, defining for them God's perfect standard of right and wrong. And the core of these laws is known as the 10 Commandments. They were inscribed on 2 tablets of stone by the very finger of God. In Exodus 19:8, when the Israelites heard that God was about to make a covenant with them and that he required absolute obedience to his perfect laws, they confidently told Moses, "We will do everything the Lord has said." But would they really be able to keep the terms of the covenant and obey God's laws? As we look at these commands, ask yourself the same question. How many of these laws do you obey? On the morning of the 3rd day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God. And God spoke all these words, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Israel had just left a country that believed there were a multitude of gods and goddesses to be served and appeased. But God's first commandment to his people was, "You shall have no other gods before me." God commanded his people to worship, trust, and serve him alone. In Isaiah 45:5, God explains that apart from me, there is no other God. But do you daily put your trust in God alone? What about when you're faced with a serious problem, such as a sickness or a financial crisis? Where do you go for help? Who or what do you seek after in order to gain guidance, protection, or prosperity? If you have ever sought after another being, spirit, or source of power other than God, then you have broken this commandment. But maybe you haven't sought after other beings, ancestors, spirits, or powers, but instead of trusting in God, you have lived your whole life completely trusting in yourself. According to Jeremiah 17:5, this is what the Lord says: "Cursed is the one who trusts in man, and whose heart turns away from the Lord." The second commandment God gave was against making and worshiping idols. God said, "You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above." God forbade his people from making an idol made to look like any heavenly being, angel, or even God himself. God also prohibited his people from making an idol in the form of anything or anyone on the earth beneath or in the waters below. God commanded them to not make an idol of anything on this earth. This includes all animals, vegetation, and people, either living or dead. And God went on to say, "You shall not bow down to them or worship them." Notice that God not only prohibited worshiping idols, but also bowing down to them or venerating them. For God says, "I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." God never allowed his people to have an icon, image, or idol, even in representation of him. In Isaiah 42:8, God says, "I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not give my glory to another, or my praise to idols." Have you ever given your praise to an idol or bowed down to it? Have you ever worshiped or prayed to an image? If so, you've broken this commandment. There are over 200 verses in the Bible against idols. Isaiah 44:20 explains that those who are worshiping idols have had their hearts deceived without even questioning, "Is not this thing in my right hand a lie?" God pleads with his people and with you, don't be deluded. In Isaiah 46:7, God describes those who trust in idols by saying, "They lift it to their shoulders and carry it. They set it up in its place, and there it stands. From that spot it cannot move. Though one cries out to it, it does not answer. It cannot save him from his troubles." And in verse 9, "I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me." Over and over again, God commands his people to not trust in idols. He says, I am God. I'm your creator. Worship, serve, and trust me alone. In the third commandment, God says, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. God's name is to be used with utmost honor. God prohibited his people from using his name in a curse or simply in an empty expression. Whenever someone says, oh my God, it's so hot today, or oh my God, that is so awesome. Were they thinking about God or praying to him? No. Both of those are examples of misusing God's name. But what about you? Have you ever used God's name as an expression? Or have you ever blurted out God's name without even thinking about what you are saying? If you have, then you have broken this commandment. And Exodus 20, verse 7 ends by saying, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. The fourth commandment says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. God commanded his people to not work on the seventh day of each week, but instead dedicate that day to him. Observance of this day not only gave his people a day of rest in which they could worship him, but also uniquely set the nation of Israel apart from the other nations around them. But what about you? Have you obeyed this law? If you are basing your acceptance by God on the fact that you keep the Sabbath, you need to realize that if you do not dedicate every single Sabbath to God, you are guilty of breaking this commandment. In the fifth commandment, God says, honor your father and your mother. God not only commanded us to obey our parents, but God also said, honor them. Honoring goes beyond outward conformity and deals with the heart. The opposite of honoring would include disobedience, talking back, arguing, or being disrespectful. So what about you? Have you ever done any of these things to your parents? If so, then you've broken this commandment. The sixth commandment says, you shall not murder. God, as the author and giver of life, views every human being as precious. And many of us read this commandment and we think, well, at least this is one commandment that I've never broken. I've never killed anyone. Are you sure you've never broken this commandment? Listen to these verses from Matthew chapter 5. You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. All our actions flow from our hearts, and God will judge not only the act of murder, but a heart with murderous thoughts. 1 John 3:15 says, anyone who hates his brother is a murderer. So now what do you think? Have you ever hated anyone or been angry with them? If so, you've also broken this commandment. Not only did God create life, but God is also the author and designer of marriage. Here in the seventh commandment, God gives us an important boundary for marriage. Because from the very beginning, God intended marriage to be one woman for one man for a lifetime. In Proverbs 5:18, God even tells the husband, Rejoice in the wife of your youth. And in verse 19, he says, may you ever be captivated by her love. The physical intimacy that a husband and wife share is a precious gift to their marriage. That's why here in the 7th commandment, God says, you shall not commit adultery. Adultery is being sexually intimate with someone you are not married to. God says, don't do that. If you do, you'll destroy yourself and your marriage. Some people read this commandment and think, I'm not even married, so I haven't broken this commandment. Independently of whether you are married or single, God demands faithfulness and purity, not only in your actions, but with your eyes and your heart as well. Matthew 5:28 says, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. According to God, even if you've only looked in lust on the body of a person you are not married to, then you are guilty of breaking this commandment. The 8th commandment is, you shall not steal. Stealing is taking anything that doesn't belong to you, but belongs to someone else. Have you broken this commandment? Have you ever cheated, taking answers that weren't rightfully yours? Have you ever taken music or movies or information that you didn't pay for? Have you ever cheated on your taxes or at your job, saying that you worked 8 hours when you only worked 7? If under any circumstance you have taken something that does not belong to you, then you have broken this commandment. The 9th commandment says, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. God only speaks the truth, and He requires that we also speak the truth in everything that we say. Yet, we have a tendency to think, oh, it's just a little white lie. It's okay. Nobody's going to get hurt. But Matthew 12:36 says that all people will have to give account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken. So have you ever told a lie? If so, then you have broken this commandment. The last of the 10 commandments says, you shall not covet. Not only is coveting a sin, but it often leads a person to break other commands of God in order to get what they are coveting after. What about you? Have you ever become unsatisfied with what you already have and been consumed with a desire to have something that is not yours? If so, you've coveted and are guilty of breaking this commandment. After examining the 10 commandments, do you think the Israelites were capable of perfectly obeying them? Though the Israelites had been confident that they could keep all of God's laws, they broke them over and over again. What about you? Have you completely obeyed God's commandments? The truth is, every single person who honestly evaluates their life will have to admit they have broken them. And like the Israelites, many times we have done it over and over again. We have a problem then. Because God is holy, because He is completely pure, with nothing evil in Him, God requires absolute obedience to these laws. God does not allow us to pick and choose which laws we want to follow or which laws we think it's okay to break. God commanded his people to keep all of them. Galatians 3:10 says, "Cursed is everyone who does not continue to do everything written in the book of the law." What gives eternal magnitude to these commandments is the fact that in Hebrews 9:27, God says, "Man is destined to die once." Rich or poor, educated or not, good or bad, no one escapes death. Every person is destined to die. And after that, to face judgment. After death, God will judge every single person. And according to Revelation 20, verse 12, the actions of every single person are recorded by God in his books. Can you imagine? Every single careless word that you have spoken, everything that your hands have done, every place that your feet have gone, all the hidden secrets that you thought no one knew about, God recorded them. And he will judge every single one of these actions. Maybe you're thinking, Arlen, no one would be able to survive a judgment like that. If God already knew that we wouldn't be able to obey his laws, why in the world did he give them to us? In Romans chapter 3, verse 20, God explains, "Through the law, we become conscious of sin." The reason that God gave us the 10 Commandments was so that we would realize we are sinners. Because sin is anything that goes against the perfect character of God. This means that any of your actions, or any word you say, or any thought you have that is against God's perfect character is sin. When God gave the Israelites the 10 Commandments, he already knew that they were sinners. It was the people who didn't realize how sinful their lives were. So God gave them his holy laws to function like a mirror, to show the people their own sinfulness. For example, someone could have a dirty face and not even realize it. But if he looked into a mirror, he would see himself and realize just how dirty his face really was. And God knew that in our own pride, we'd be just like that person with dirt all over his face, not realizing how sinful our own lives really are. But when we honestly look at God's perfect laws, they function just like a mirror. The law shows us how far our own lives are from the perfect character of God. God's character is holy, which means he is pure and there is nothing evil in him. But when we look at the law, we realize we are not holy and our own lives are full of evil. The law was given so that we would realize we are sinners. Galatians 3:24 says that God also gave the law in order to lead people to the coming deliverer. God knew that if the people could recognize the fact that they were sinners, they would realize that they needed someone to rescue them from their sins. The deliverer would be the only one who would be able to perfectly obey God's laws. His life would be completely pure, with nothing evil in him. He would be the only one who would be able to resolve the problem of their sins. And God knew, in order for the people to realize their only hope was in the coming deliverer, they needed the law. God required perfect obedience to his laws. Although the Israelites were confident they would be able to keep them, because of their sinfulness, they could not. They broke his laws over and over again. An honest evaluation of your life will reveal that you also have broken God's commandments. Because of your sin, perfect obedience is also impossible for you. In Hebrews 9:27, it is written that man is destined to die once, and after that, to face judgment. After death, God will judge every single person according to what they have done. Even if you have kept the whole law and only broken one command, James 2:10 says that you are guilty of breaking all of it. The day will come when you will have to give account to God for every action, every word, and every thought. When God gave the people the law, he already knew that they would not be able to keep his commandments. Like a mirror that reveals to us an imperfection, the 10 Commandments reveal to people the sin in their lives and hearts. The law pointed people to the coming deliverer. Their only hope would be in someone who could rescue them from their sins. This is the only hope for me and for you.